Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is about navigating the make it or break it moments in marriage.
So whether you feel you're in one of these make it or break it moments, or someone that you know and you're trying to understand it more, it's not an easy stage to be in. And we really extend our hearts out to anyone going through this because we know it's really confusing. It's a really uncertain time. There might even be some sense of not wanting to tell people that you're in this. And I think that's because our culture and our society still, you still say, oh, we're good, we're just busy. And we've known personally 5 couples in this last year, including one yesterday. A family member that we found out filed for divorce, had no clue. By the way, none of these 5 couples that we know ever reached out to us for support. And that's part of the vicious cycle that happens, is that people don't reach out for support. Not that they had to reach out to us specifically, but a lot of them not even reaching out for support from anyone. And we're going to get further into that.
I do want to say this has been a part of a struggle for me personally. It's brought some sadness. It's brought some different feelings. Now, those of you listening are not particularly marriage coaches or do what we do, so a little bit different context. And I'm not necessarily expecting everyone to reach out to me, but whatever industry you're in, right? If you're in finance and friends of yours were having financial questions and struggles, you would hope that you could contribute in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever industry you're in, obviously you get the analogy. And so it has been kind of sad and interesting for me personally, that primarily because these 5 couples, the husbands were very good friends of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And, brought me to this place where I felt that we had a friendship and a relationship in which they would have brought these things to me, and then I would hope that I always come across as non-judgmental. And I did talk with one friend about this, and he said, yeah, it has nothing to do with that. It was really just that there's some ego in there, there's some pride, and then there is definitely embarrassment. So I understand it. I'm trying to have a lot of empathy for how hard that is for couples going through that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, you have to be in the place where we are, where it's like, hey, this is what we do. But the other side of it is when you find out that friends of yours, they go the route of breaking it.
Or they feel uncertain if they'll make it or break it.
Well, I think it's even more so you usually don't find out until it's kind of already said and done. And then you just feel so surprised, right? And confused. I didn't see that coming, or could I have helped in some way? So we want to address this. How does this come to be? Whether it is for you in this season and you're not at the break it, but you want some more insight on this pathway, how to navigate it, or maybe there is someone in your life that this is applicable to, and maybe you could see some of the signs to where maybe you can provide some support, even if it's sending this episode.
And one of the intentions too, I just want to add on that, and then we'll dive into these different sections. There were even 2 couples that we're working with privately last week who really felt as though they were at the break it moment. And, we say to them, look, we're not here to convince you to stay together by any means. And here's what we want to lay out for you so that if you chose that path, you don't have regret. You don't have what if, or did we? And so our intention for this episode is that if you are in this season, you get clarity to hopefully have the tools and the strategy to actually focus on making it, which we're going to explain what that means, because it's not about, let's just survive another 30 years together, but also clarity so that you really know, okay, when though is it best to break it, which we hope is very much the last resort. So we've got a lot to outline here. Let's start with why couples even reach this point, because I know you can feel alone in that. And also is this just us? Is there something wrong with us specifically? It feels very personal.
I just feel I want to provide context to the one statement. I certainly know what you mean. I don't want anyone to be left with that we don't stand for the marriage or people being together. We absolutely do. And we realize that on coaching sessions, or with any couple, if an individual has already decided, and this is a point I want to get into here. I don't know how long, it's gonna be like 15 minutes in. We're gonna talk about the point in which a partner has made the decision to end it. That's very difficult for the other partner to navigate. And so that's what we meant on the session by saying we're not here to convince you, because we understand it's going to be kind of futile and a waste of our time if we're not honest with one another. If a partner has already made the decision, then any support, guidance, urgency, context, skills, changes of perception that we try to offer is going to feel as if we're just trying to convince someone that's already decided. So I want to provide that context just so you know the stand that we are for marriage, because we certainly are a stand.
Yes.
And as Jocelyn said, that at the very end of this, we will give you sort of why or in what situation you do likely need to move towards the break it. But
which
you
is
can
a few
still
exceptions.
do that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a very last resort. So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
The way we want to talk through this initially is what gets couples to this point. Now, it's not a hard and fast logistical step process here. However, the way that we kind of see this is a buildup, that you have more general, kind of more benign upsets that happen and they move to compound into bigger things. So if we were to talk about stages, we're just kind of making this up. We're going to have 3 stages of why couples get to this point of a make it or break it. Now, the first one is just more of the day-to-day things that don't seem like all that big of a deal. But you'll get to a place as a partner where certain needs or expectations are not getting met. Now, as simple as that really is the basis, though it gets more complicated and more specific about what those needs are, how you communicate about them, how you repair from disruptions, how you escalate. We're getting there. But this is really the basis. And some expectations being, is it fair? Is it unfair? Are they expressed? Are they not expressed? Have you been communicating about them? Right. So all these things. But it's sort of this slower buildup over some time. If you have unmet needs, which could be in the realm of like physical security, could it go to emotional or mental needs, could go to sexual and intimate needs. And those are going to change in the years that you're together. So the point being, whatever the expression of the need or the desire, it's that it's not met, and then it's over some time that it continues to not be met. Again, the biggest challenge is if you're not ever communicating that to your partner, and we'll get more into that.
You would be surprised, like you hear Aaron say that they're not communicated, and you'd be surprised how many couples that we have worked with professionally and also know personally, where there is something that they're feeling, a need that's not met or an expectation. And we ask, hey, well, have you brought this up? And the common response is, well, no, I don't want to start a fight. And that's one of the ways that it becomes compounded, is now if you feel as though you can't bring things up without it becoming an issue. And look, we're all going to have expectations and needs in a marriage. That's part of being human. Like, we are not able to have zero expectations and needs. That's natural, especially if you're going to build a life with someone. The key is that we talk about them, we negotiate about them, right? I don't mean like a business negotiation, but more so like, okay, let's talk about how to incorporate that into our lives and in this season.
Yeah, and we're really getting more into what you need to do later. So I want to really stay focused on the particular stage. It's been interesting to us because exactly what Jocelyn is saying, 4 of the 5 couples in our life actually fell into this place where it wasn't being expressed at all. And so how this ends up feeling so abrupt to the other partners, that when it's finally brought up, it's that a partner is already at the end of their rope.
Or it's so much intensity with it, so much resentment.
Yeah, and and I've been surprised. 4 of these 5 couples, it all comes to the forefront and communicated all at once, like this huge thing of, my needs haven't been getting met for years. And they've already pretty much made the decision, like it's over. And that's why this is so difficult for the other partner to be in this break it or make it stage, is because, well, it sounds like you've already decided.
Or I didn't get a chance.
You didn't even communicate for years. And so it does seem so unfair and so abrupt. And ultimately, I think what gets forgotten in this initial stage is a marriage is about a willingness to do good for your other partner.
To be like giving and of service.
And in a sense, more than for yourself. And I know it seems so simple, but when I even think about it for myself, if I wasn't being aware of our years together, and we just had our anniversary last week, I mean, I can see that you fall into a life that's routine and comfortable, and you go about your business, and then these needs don't get expressed, and they seem small, and it's not a big deal, and I don't need to bring them up, but it just builds up so much, and to the point where you're really only focused on, even though you're not expressing them, you're just focused on your own needs not being met, and so you don't put yourself in this mentality and this state that marriage requires, which is for you to care more about your partner's needs than yourself.
And both of you having that mentality, right? It's not
definitely.
It's not you giving 95% and then they give you 2, right? It's if you both maintain that mentality of service, of giving, of wanting to contribute to their happiness, that is a recipe for success, both having that mentality and heart.
Mm-hmm. And you just can't be in a place where you start to be more focused on yourself or give into your selfish, short-term focused impulses. That's a recipe for disaster. So that really covers our first stage. And so as you can see, if that's really not getting communicated, if that's not like open between the two of you, then it just really starts to compound into other things.
So the next thing that can really show up, and this can really show up at day 1 or day, year 10 together, but it's the impact of lower emotional intelligence. And this is something, we both are passionate about, but I especially find myself really drawn to this kind of research and this content around emotional intelligence because when we're in a partnership, it is the most intimate relationship that we have. Of course, physically intimate, but emotionally intimate. And we are going to see all of each other. We're going to see the good parts of each other, which we certainly hope are like the majority of what you see. But there's going to be stuff you see in each other. You're going to see each other's triggers. You're going to see your flaws, your insecurities, your fears, your wounding from the past. And we need to be able to be equipped with emotional intelligence skills to navigate those moments because emotions are not always logical. They make sense because they're your experience, they're valid in that sense, but we need to be able to dig deeper together. And what we just outlined in that first stage, if I have unmet needs, for example, or these expectations I haven't expressed, therefore you can't know what they are and meet them. But then when I go to try to bring them up, because this is another dynamic, okay, no, Freeman's, no, I try to bring it up, but it turns into a fight. That's due in part, if not largely, because emotional intelligence skills are missing. And this needs to be more emphasized in our culture. We need to focus on this with our children, with school, but it's still so much about intellectual intelligence.
And I feel like it's a common term that comes in and out. So what for you really is a measure of emotional intelligence?
So I would summarize it as your ability to identify and cope with your own feelings, as well as navigate and be supportive to your partner's emotions, right? So it's about your own and your partner's. Notice that I said supportive responses. Doesn't mean you fix their emotions, doesn't mean you're responsible for your partner's emotions. But for example, if I see my partner and they are triggered, is it most supportive for me to get triggered back and now we're in this big argument and this conflict? Or is it most supportive to say, hey, seems like something's coming up for you. Why don't you share what that is? Or your partner is feeling upset because something isn't occurring in the relationship. And even if they don't say it the right way, because that's where so much focus goes is in how they say it. Yes, that's the person throwing the ball, right? Like if you're playing catch with someone, yes, our responsibility, I feel like I'm jumping to some of the things to get better at, but sorry, it's just so important. Like how I say things is me throwing the ball. But a lot of emotional intelligence is me catching the ball. And even if you don't throw it right to me and it's not perfectly said and in the perfect tone, I still have a role in how I catch it. And that's emotional intelligence. Like, what is the best response here right now for harmony? So that's stage 2 is the lack of emotional intelligence. And these are other big flaws that we see come up, which is a lack of integrity, a lack of accountability. Those are character traits that we not only get as we're growing up, but they get strengthened as adults. And frankly, a lot of people, even those who are successful, have not like held themselves to a standard of high integrity, which is not only that you keep your word for small and big things, but that if you do forget something, break a promise, not keep an agreement for conflict, for example, that you own up to it because we're not perfect. Anything more you want to add about the integrity or accountability?
Well, if you think about it like I think about it, we're in stage 2. You end up letting yourself off the hook. You lower your own standard around integrity and accountability. If in stage 1, you have all these unmet needs that start to build up, even if you're not communicating about them, you start focusing more on those needs rather than the needs of your partner. And then your emotional intelligence has been lacking. You feel like your partner doesn't respond well when you have brought it up. Then that leads you to a place of this justification that, well, I don't really need to keep my agreements or my promises, or I don't need to really put in the effort for myself to fill their love account. So it really just is this place where you start to justify to yourself why you can have a lack of integrity rather than hold that standard.
So going to stage 3, and then we're going to get to some of the sections about more of how to navigate those make it or break it. But then what happens with the buildup of all of that is that the amount or intensity of conflict becomes so draining. It becomes more escalated. It's more frequent. You two aren't keeping your agreements for times of conflict, which, by the way, that's something we talk about in our de-escalating conflicts guide. You not only need to use it and come up with those agreements, but also have the strategies for de-escalating. And so because it's getting more amplified, you're also not repairing, especially if you don't have good repair skills. And so then you're not taking responsibility. And so now it's like, wow, we have these intense conflicts and one or both of us is not taking responsibility and repairing. Wow, that hurts. And so what? I'm supposed to just go into the next day and then start to be loving again and start to, get back to business as usual. And it just you can see how it becomes this vicious cycle of conflict, no repair, unmet needs, lack of emotional intelligence, and builds into this perfect storm, having you both feel some combination of unloved and or unliked, which I know that's not the correct word, right? It's actually disliked, but I thought that would sound similar, unloved or disliked, meaning,
I was even going to add unaccepted. And I think there are some even gender differences in this one. I think from the conversations we've had, I think this gets men to a place of, well, this is who I am. And if you're not going to accept me, then that's the move towards like the break it from the make it. And I think for women, that does sound more like, so that's the I'm not accepted.
Yeah.
Women maybe more in the unloved or even unliked, right? How often have we heard, well, I know you love me. And what they mean by that is there's a affinity there. There's a commitment to baseline needs of security and responsibilities in the home. But what's missing is that closeness and or that passion, which we've talked about. So, oh, I know you love me, but do you like me still?
Yeah.
I think
the things you say in a conflict, for example, especially if you guys are saying hurtful things to each other, or you're not making those deposits to each other's love account because of all the other things. And so it's a barrier to you doing those. It's like, do you even like who I am now? Do you accept me? Do you, love me? And that continues to demotivate both of you, right? Like, and we haven't said that word yet in this episode. That's really important, that all of these things that are just piling on and creating this vicious cycle, it's demotivating. So therefore your actions become less positive and you're not able to bounce back.
Well, even before that, I would say that then causes these two major dynamics, which we talked about last time, and that's that you distance yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You start to distance yourself both from the physical proximity and continuing or developing the emotional closeness. So you start to withdraw, in a sense. You start to pull away from. And that only creates these projections and these stories and these filters and these beliefs about your partner, which culminates in that your home no longer feels like a place of peace.
Yeah. That your home, like, because we all want our home, our environment, our family, that space to be rejuvenating, to be a place that we're filled up, where we get support and we get love and it's harmonious. And when that shifts to be predominantly a place where you actually feel more drained, or you feel consumed by each other's moods or the unresolved issues, now it's like, wow, I don't even feel right or good in this space, which is supposed to be home. Like, think about what that environment's supposed to be. And so I think we're good now to transition to the next section, which is about what keeps some couples focused on making it, right? The decision to say, okay, we don't want to break it, even though all that has been going on for either a short term or a long term. What keeps us going? And these are some of the common ones. You're probably going to relate to at least a couple of them in terms of, if you're in this stage, what keeps you saying it. But just know that the next section we're going to be going to after this is, what is making it actually look like? What does it require from both of you? So number one, I'm sure you can imagine this. We know not all of you are parents, but for those of you who are, you know that your kids is maybe the top thing that pops to your mind about why we would want to keep fighting for our marriage and make it. And we all know, we care. We know this will impact them in some way, to some degree, right? It's a spectrum, and it really matters on about so many different circumstances. But even based on studies, and there's a lot of variances, right? But based on studies, some general points that we can make is that kids do experience higher levels of stress, more difficulty focusing in class, struggling with peer relationships, even like some comparison, which I can relate to these, you guys. I was a child of divorce, and every single one of those I can say I experienced. Now, here's an interesting thing to also say. The level of distress that each parent is in, because everyone copes differently with parting ways, and also really matters how a couple parts ways. Some people are more gracious and productive and kind about it, whereas some people, including how my parents handled it, was like a world war. And it was not kind in any way. And it was extremely intense and extremely toxic. And so the level of distress that each parent is in, because it's going to affect the parents just like the kids, that influences how engaged they can be with their kids, right? So I can even think about when my parents parted ways, and I could see, even when I was younger, they were stressed. They were more quiet. They were coping in some negative ways. And that level of disengagement to engagement then can influence how the child copes, and do they go to positive strategies or more negative? For example, do they lean more towards like delinquent tendencies? I know it's kind of funny to use that term delinquent, but just to categorize maladaptive strategies, right? Do they resort to hanging out with the wrong people? Do they resort to substances if they're in their teens, for example? There's an abundance of different activities that they could resort to. I think you get the picture. And look, we're not saying that this is all negative on them. In fact, there are some studies that say that it is healthier for the child if it's extremely toxic in the household, right? So we're not saying that it's never better for the children to part ways, and we're going to really start to distinguish those differences. But that is a big driver for why a lot of couples would continue is, you know what, we want to really give our kids a stable and healthy household. So let's put in the work. And that is really key. Next is being afraid of regret. Like, I'm afraid that if we don't really give it like another shot, or we don't get resources or support and we give up on this, that in a year or 5 years, I'll wonder, did we though? Did we give it our best effort? Was there more we could have done? So just that wondering, that regret is really big. And then finally feeling the motivation to seek support is a big one. Like, okay, you know what? we've done this on our own. We have tried to talk about it, argue about it, talk about this and that and changes. And you know what? Fine. Let's get support. Let's get outside resources. So that is a big motivator. Any more that you want to cover for why couples would say, you know what, let's really try to make it here?
I'd like to move into what it requires because you'll get more of a sense of how you get to this decision point then too. And it's just that you have to make this internal decision that you're going to be more committed to someone else than yourself, and that you're committed to some idea of the future rather than letting yourself stay stuck in the present situation and how you feel about it right now. So we often say, more simply, you have to act from your commitment rather than how you feel.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the harder things to do in this make it or break it, because obviously you get the sense of all the things that we put together. If you're in a place where all this has compounded, yeah, you don't feel like making it. You don't feel like putting in the effort. You haven't felt like giving more to your partner than yourself. You haven't felt like initiating repair when you know that that's required. And that's just such a key differentiator between couples that do decide to make it rather than break it. It's you just decide to move towards a more compelling future than what would be predictable for how you feel right now.
And if I could, I would feel remiss if I didn't say this right as we transition to that, is a big driver can also be faith for people. You know, that their faith and wanting to truly overcome something, a challenge, a barrier, is a big driver. So I wanted to make sure I said that because I know that that's a big driver for people.
Now, as you hear this, we are talking about a really big topic. And so I don't want anyone to have the expectation that just listening to this podcast is the only resource. So if you're in a place where this feels like the make it or break it for you, or even someone you know, just go to meetthefreemans.com/links and look for our resources like the Rebuilding Us Challenge, the Steps to Rebuilding a Marriage Guide, and other guide resources that we have. If it's just about the rebuilding, meetthefreemans.com/rebuild is just the challenge and the guide itself.
Yeah.
Now, one of the mentalities that are also needed as you move into the decision and the phase to rebuild is going to be your commitment to look in the mirror first and saying, okay, how have I or how am I contributing to our patterns and our cycles? Because you do influence each other's behavior and attitude. We talked about last time, you have these terms emotional crossover and emotional spillover. The spillover being one segment of the day to the next, the crossover being from you to your partner. And you have to adopt early on in this phase what we've come up with this last 2 weeks, this acronym SPA, S-P-A. You have to understand that you're going to have to take on for yourself learning and implementing the proper marriage and relationship skills. And if you are taking away the process that we're talking about here, there's obviously skills around expressing needs and expectations. There's de-escalating tension in the conflict cycle. There's repair.
There's emotional intelligence skills.
There's a lot of these base skills that you have to be yourself using and implementing. So you have to be implementing the skills. That's the S. P is that you have to recognize that this buildup is now also coming from a limited and very skewed perception that you now have of the marriage and of your partner. And you're not going to overcome a poor limiting perception and implement the skills. You're going to let yourself off the hook. You're going to not follow through on the things that you say. If you see your partner, for example, as someone that's controlling, someone that doesn't prioritize you, then you're not going to be implementing the skills. You're not going to have the motivation. You're not going to have the urgency to put in those skills and make the changes that you need to, because that perception is going to drive your feelings about your partner and how much effort you're willing to put in. So unless you really look at your perception, then you're just not even going to implement the skills. The A, which we're not going to go too much into, is sort of the final piece of acceptance. Now, if you're implementing the skills yourself, you're looking at the places where you yourself can get better, where you're contributing to the patterns, so looking in the mirror, and you're responsible for an altered, futuristic, compelling perception of your partner, then at the end of this, you can then say, we have personality differences. Like, of course. And hey, here are some of my preferences. Here are some of my personality traits and differences that I know are different from you and cause little tensions. And I need you to accept that about me.
Yeah. About each other.
About each other.
Mm-hmm.
That is the proper way as we close this whole thing out on how do you really decide on the make it or the break it. You cannot even engage in a conversation about break it if you yourself are not using the spa. If you're not putting in the skills and implementing the skills for yourself, if you're not responsible for your perception that drives your attitude and your action, then you're in no spot to say, well, this is over. And I may be speaking more to the men with this phrase, this is me, accept it or leave it. You can't even ask that. It's ridiculous to say that if you're not responsible for implementing any positive skills or managing your perception. You can't ask someone to accept it. Are you playing at your best?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. You're saying, accept this very poor version of myself. Accept it or leave it. That's not the place to make this decision from. Yes. The only place you can make the decision from is, I know how I've showed up. I've showed up implementing the skills. I've managed the perception, and I'm clear about my personality differences and traits and preferences. I'm asking for that to be accepted. And then if your partner can't accept that, now you're more on the path of needing to maybe quote unquote break it. But you're just doing it in a much more conscious way that allows for even the ending of a marriage relationship to be a creation and not something that you just throw your hands up at and as a shock because you haven't been expressing any of this and you're not showing up as your best self. Like that's not a place to make this decision from.
I want to offer more to distinguish that acceptance piece, because when you ask someone to accept parts of you, there's also more to dig into in terms of, would you want someone to accept negative coping mechanisms? So an example of this would be that if you told me, hey, one of the things that affects me is how you handle stress. You resort to making the household really tense and you lash out on me and you snap at our kids. And that's something that I need you to work on, right? So if this is something you're saying to me and I'm like, no, that's just who I am. Take it or leave it.
Yeah. Maybe I'm out drinking. I'm like out late.
Right.
It's like, oh, accept me. It's like, no, you're in such a poor coping state. Yes. You can't accept a partner to accept that.
So that's what I want to distinguish is like, what do we want to have accepted? We don't want these negative coping mechanisms to be something that we accept. We would hope our partner would challenge us to become the best version of ourselves. But then there are also just these personality differences, right? And, for example, if I just tend to be a little bit more silly and sarcastic, like I would hope you're not trying to change me to be a less silly person. And so what we need to discuss, and this goes to another point in terms of what does this look like, right? What's required for making it? Erin laid out the SPA acronym there, but there's also a willingness to have some harder conversations and having a conversation where you're hearing each other out. You're not just getting triggered by each other, reacting, misinterpreting, but you're asking clarifying questions of each other. You're wanting to understand each other on a deeper level. What are the needle movers for each of us? And Erin said it really fast. And so I want to make sure that you guys all heard it. If you're wanting more structure for what these conversations look like, because this is big stuff that we're laying out and we have more points still to make. We have an entire guide where it is laid out for how to have these conversations, how to make sure they're constructive, how to make sure you're actually moving forward. And so that's the Steps to Rebuild a Marriage guide. And then we also, because there were so many requests for this, created a 30-day couples challenge called the Rebuilding Us Challenge, where the prompts are more challenging than our Prioritizing Us challenge and focus on topics like emotional intelligence, learning repair skills, talking about the needle movers, but it's broken into daily prompts. So both of those you can see at meetthefreemans.com/rebuild. So I just wanted to make sure that's clear, because as we even continue into these next points, you're going to be like, wait, Freemans, I got to write this down. And how do we translate this into a conversation? And that's all laid out there. So a willingness to have these conversations. And remember, as we've talked about with all of these points so far, two things can be true in your marriage. And what I mean by that is, let's say you two are talking about how you handle conflict, and one of you is saying, well, you know what? I need you to give me some more time to cool off. Like you follow me and you tell me we have to talk about it now. I need you to give more time. And then the other partner is saying, okay, but I also can't go days not being resolved and repaired and talking about it. Okay, both of those things can be true. How do you come up with a win-win? How do you give one partner some space and some time to process and cool off while also having the other person feel secure and feel repaired? So maintaining that mindset of two things can be true in your marriage. Now let's go to the next point. Erin, I'd love for you to elaborate on this because this is so important, and you alluded to it quickly, but a new vision for your marriage. Because look, there is no going back. You're not going to go back to how you were before kids, or go back to how things were 5 years ago or when you first got together. That's an illusion of going back. You two have evolved. Your circumstances have changed. Your identities, what's important to you. So rather than focusing on going back anywhere, it's what's the vision moving forward for our ideal partnership and marriage.
Yeah, it's just a refocus on a collaborative and motivating future, really such that you can assess the current issues you have now as challenges that you are going to overcome together, rather than them being threats, which is how you see it now. Threats to yourself, your self view,
Your
your
freedom.
needs, your freedom, your self expression, the person you want to be right now. You're seeing everything as a threat to all of these unmet needs. And without going into much more, you just need a compelling vision and future that puts you back as a collaborative team that says, yes, now these things are just places that together we're going to overcome. We also know that a part of life and a part of marriage is that we evolve and develop our character, and we're going to do that together. And that can be enough to say we're willing to have the hard conversations. We're each willing to look at the places to make the changes, implement the skills, be responsible for my perception. And you just need enough to start down the path.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you two have a driver, a why. And this may not be the case for everyone, but one for me that truly, to my bones, no matter what you and I would encounter, and we've experienced some hard seasons, not just because of dynamics within our partnership, but really difficult circumstances that would have really tested a lot of marriages. But for me, the motivator that will have me continue to do the work to become the best version of myself is our daughter. Is I want to be a cycle breaker. As a child of divorce, I mean, this is everything to me. And I'm not just going to fight for us to survive. I am going to fight for us to thrive. So I'm going to set my ego aside, even if there are times where I'm like, that perspective doesn't make sense, or mine does, because we all have that ego part of ourselves. It's like, no, that part doesn't make sense. This is my perspective. Well, you know what? I'm willing to set that aside and say, you know what? Let me hear him out. Let me hear how I'm contributing to his perception, as Erin talked about, because I want nothing more than my daughter to see a thriving partnership. She will not see survival. She will not see toxicity, unhealthy patterns, and us repeating the things that we saw. So I know I just got in this motivation tangent, but I want you, the listener, to dig deep into what's the driver for you and that vision of who you two can become, and make it so inspiring, so compelling that you want to become those people. You'll do anything to become those people. And it doesn't mean the version of you now isn't good enough. It doesn't mean that you're bad people. We meet with great people every day who are hardworking. They work really hard for their families. They're great in their careers. They do a lot in their homes. So you're still a good person, and there might be patterns that you've continued that are not contributing to happiness, love, security within the partnership. So thank you for listening to my motivational TED Talk on that. Erin really already said this point, so I'll just use it as a reminder in the spa, is that the next thing to be focusing on, right, is focusing on getting support and mastering healthy skills. And support can look a lot of different ways. It can be meeting with someone individually. It can be going to workshops, which, by the way, we have 2 spots left for our in-person couples workshop on October 6th. So you could go to our links to attend that workshop. It could be using resources online privately. Like if you just want to do things, more DIY, then use our guides, use our challenges, but getting support, because here's the thing. You two are biased, right? You're biased in your own favor. You see the good in yourself and the bad in your partner a lot of times. And so sometimes you need an outside perspective talking about things like conflict, communication, connection, to say, you know what, here's some of the dynamics that are very common and how you both contribute and what you both can do. So focusing on skills, and that's really what we do. We're not here to say you need to fix yourself and you're a bad person. I already talked about that. This is skill acquisition, and there's nothing more high stakes than who you choose to marry and build a life with. That requires skills. And a lot of people still have not caught up with that mindset of how important that is. Just because you're a good person and you're hardworking doesn't mean you were raised being taught healthy conflict or being shown what emotional intelligence looks like. So a lot of us as adults are acquiring those skills now, just like if you wanted to get better with financial skills or with basketball or knitting or pickleball, like just that same mindset of wanting to get better at something that is important to you. I would hope you'd have the same mindset about learning how to be the best spouse that you can be, and what skills that requires. So that's really key. We want to just close out with a couple notes, and we had said we would talk about when is it best or appropriate to break it. Now, of course, any form of abuse is unacceptable, right? No one would say stay in an abusive situation. So that's absolutely an exception for when it's appropriate to break it and make sure that you are safe and not in those toxic situations. Also, if one partner is unwilling to work on themselves, especially as it pertains to the really important needs and dynamics, healthy dynamics that you want to create in a relationship. If someone is not willing to work on their anger and how they handle anger, and they have that take it or leave it mindset, that is not something you have to stay in, is those unhealthy dynamics where someone is not willing to work on their part. Also, if it is more unhealthy for you or your kids to stay, right? If it just continues to be so toxic and you have gotten support and you've gotten tools, and for whatever reason, it is just still not becoming healthy, then of course that would be an option. Or if there's an unwillingness to agree on the non-negotiables. For example, if I felt like, hey, Erin, a non-negotiable is that you're not looking at inappropriate material online, and you were like, no, this is important to me and I'm unwilling to change that. Well, if that's a needle mover for me, that's a base important thing for me to feel secure and loved in a partnership, that would be very hard to overcome, right? Unless that person, again, was willing to work on it. I want to say, though, that in many cases of people that we've talked to, they've really not worked at it. Doing the work is having support, structure, accountability to work on yourselves as individuals and as a couple. And looking at just social media posts and getting inspired for 5 minutes is also not the work. Of course, it can give you ideas and it can give you direction, But doing the work is so much more of that commitment and application. What you do, not just for 3 days and then to default to old patterns, it's what you do consistently for months and months until it becomes your new normal. So we can't emphasize enough acquiring and focusing on structure, accountability, support that has you focus on those day-to-day skills. Of course, we're big fans of the resources that we've created, and the testimonials are incredible. So we hope that you utilize every single one that we have, all of our guides, all of our challenges, because we create them to be something you can focus on every day and show each other the best versions of yourselves and actually move the needle in your relationship. So our intention for this episode in closing is really that it gives you ahas about the cycles that you two have gotten in and some of the ways that you both have contributed and where you might feel really discouraged and lost and confused. But now you're like, oh, wow, this isn't just us. And oh, by the way, we don't have to break this to just get out of this circumstance. We could actually both say, you know what? Let's grow together. Let's be cycle breakers. Let's become the best versions of ourselves. That's my favorite phrase right now, because that to me is what marriage provides an opportunity for. I want to show you, Erin, that I can continue to become better and better every year. And if you're not becoming a better version of yourself year after year, you're doing marriage wrong. Because I think that's what is possible in a partnership. So we hope this gives you clarity, inspiration, motivation, and still something to focus on, to have hope together, because we believe in you. You know, if the criteria are there that we listed and there is a willingness and you two can put in that consistent work to create healthy dynamics and love each other even better, we believe in you. So message us if there's any of the points that we made, because every single one of them could have been like an hour each. So message us if there's specific points you want us to go further into. We also have hundreds of past episodes. So if you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can hear those past and future episodes. Make sure you dive into all of our resources, as we mentioned, at meetthefreemans.com/links or meetthefreemans.com/rebuild if you want specifically the Rebuilding Marriage resources. But we are rooting for you guys, and we will talk to you on the next episode.